Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Margaret Mueller. I'm the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. I've been so looking forward to the conversation today. I want to thank all of you for joining us. We have many people logging on today. So before we get into it, we'll give everyone a minute or two to settle in. And while we do, you have a chance to hear from some of the sponsors for today's program.
It all comes down to a single, defining moment. When a plan stops being a plan and gets set into motion. Today's Merrill can help you get there with the people, tools, and personalized advice to help turn your ambitions into action. What would you like the power to do?
When a butterfly flaps its wings, it creates a wind of change. Sometimes the biggest things start small. Trace back to the moment that started big change. You'll find a pattern of personal connections, empowering us to do the extraordinary. Set in motion your own butterfly effect. Explore the stories of Deloitte's inspiring women.
Dreams begin. Okay, so hopefully everyone is settled in now. I want to take a moment to thank our Women's Leadership Series sponsors, Energy, BBDO, and Merrill, as well as our many generous sponsors for today's program. Our gold sponsors, Deloitte, Edelman, OCC, Ulta Beauty, and US Bank. And our silver sponsors, Thrive Global, Discover, Mesero, Pact with Purpose, PwC, United Healthcare, and Wells Fargo. I know there are going to be a lot of audience questions today that Pam is going to do her very best to get to as many as she can. So a reminder to enter your questions with the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Should you run into any technical issues, just email programs@executivesclub.org and a member of our team will be in touch to assist. The Women's Leadership Series is one of the hallmarks of the Executives Club of Chicago programming. This series started a little over 15 years ago, and it includes an astounding and impressive list of world-class leaders who have used this platform to amplify their voices, share leadership lessons, and ignite calls to action for our members and the business community at large in Chicago. Today is sure to be a shining example of everything that the Women's Leadership Series embodies. And here to introduce our speakers today is Mary Dillon, Chief Executive Officer of Ulta Beauty and a member of the Board of Directors of the Executives Club of Chicago. Over to you, Mary. Mary, you're on mute. You'll have to unmute and start over.
Okay, sorry. That has to happen at least once a day, right? That's the real world we're in. Thank you so much, Margaret. I'm just thrilled to be here. And as you saw on the screen earlier, Ulta is one of the proud sponsors of today's program. And I'm just really excited to be here to introduce these two really remarkable women. The Executives Club of Chicago Women's Leadership Series, as you heard from Margaret, is a great way to bring powerful voices together in the business community in Chicago and to amplify the voices of the women that it features. And as a member of the board of directors, I'm just thrilled to be part of this today. And I'm very glad to know that there are, I think, about 100 Ulta Beauty associates who are in attendance today, who I know, and I really hope there's a lot of loyal Ulta Beauty shoppers in the audience as well. We got a lot of stores in the greater Chicagoland community, as you know. But we are super proud to partner with organizations like the Executives Club to advance our commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion as we strive to use the power of beauty to make a positive impact on the millions of lives that we touch in our stores every day and in the world around us. So it's without question, we all know this, that the pandemic has presented each of us with unprecedented, unique challenges. And it's amazing, it's just over 1 year ago this all started. And throughout this pandemic, women have faced disproportionate rates of job loss. Many have left the workforce to care for family and children who've been sheltering and learning at home. This choice between maintaining a career and maintaining a family has never been more apparent than during the pandemic. So with that in mind, I think it's really vital that we all make actionable plans to ensure that we create an equitable workplace for women and for all parents for that matter, who are balancing running a place of business with a place of family in this new work world. So backed by science-based solutions to enhance well-being and performance, Thrive Global is leading the charge on behavior change technology to combat the overwhelming stress and burnout that I know have plagued many of us, not over just only this past year, but for many years. And I'm told today that we will hear from Arianna Huffington, the founder and CEO of Thrive Global, co-founder of the Huffington Post, esteemed author whose drive knows no bounds, and I'm really proud to say a friend of mine as well. I remember being asked a couple of years ago in an interview on CNBC, who's my business hero? And before I even knew her, I said Arianna, and she instantly came to mind. She's done so many things as a business leader, while also promoting living a healthy, balanced life holistically, which speaks so much to me. And in doing so in a way that I know has resonated, inspired change in so many. And joining Arianna in the conversation today is Pamela Puryear, the new Executive Vice President and Global Chief Human Resources Officer at Walgreens Boots Alliance. And congratulations to you, Pamela. I'm really confident today's conversation is going to leave everybody inspired about how we lead through this new normal and also to step up and really help and support working women. So again, thanks everybody for being here today. Without further ado, let me pass it over to Pamela. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And it is my absolute pleasure, Arianna, to be with you here today. It's a wonderful way to start off my week here on a Monday afternoon. So thank you for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, Pam. Pamela gave me permission to call her Pam, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So I recognize that you have a new book that just came out last week called A Time to Thrive. But today I want to go back to a book that you actually put out several years ago because you are, as always, ahead of your time, anticipating trends and what's to come. And at the time that you wrote the book Thrive, you put out a way of thinking about success, about really redefining how we think about success, that it's not just money and power, it's also this idea of thriving. And as it turns out, it's a perfect time for us to be having this conversation right now in the midst of a global pandemic, hopefully coming out of a global pandemic, to think about how we want to reposition our thinking about success. And because we have such a great audience of leaders here joining us today, I wanted to start off by asking you specifically, what is the role of the leader as we think about redefining success, think about thriving and creating environments where people can thrive? And specifically, you talk about leading from a place of empathy. I love that, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that with our audience today.
Thank you so much, Pam, and thank you for your leadership. And Mary, thank you for your leadership and your friendship through the years. I'm really excited to have this big conversation with you. And of course, being you started it in a very big way, which I love, because that's how it started for me. It began with a painful wake-up call when I collapsed from exhaustion, burnout, hit my head on my desk, broke my cheekbone. And then it led to my looking at the fact that my burnout was not just my story, but it was truly a global epidemic. And that was in 2007 when I collapsed. I started covering all these issues exhaustively on the Huffington Post. I wrote this book, Thrive, in 2014, and the goal was to look at what was it that made us believe that collective delusion that in order to succeed, we had to burn out in the process. And how were we defining success? And being Greek and having studied the Greek philosophers, they always looked at the whole good life. And we had reduced the good life to a successful life. And we had reduced the successful life to just money and power / status. And it seemed to me as though we're trying to sit on a two-legged stool. We had forgotten the third leg of the stool, which is about our health and well-being first. And then about our ability to connect to our own wisdom, a sense of wonder about the mystery of life and giving back, that it takes all that to have a whole life. By 2016, Pam, I had realized that there was more awareness around these issues, but people kept asking me, okay, I know I need to live differently, recharge more, sleep more, eat less sugar, but how do I do that? So I wanted to move from just raising awareness to helping people take action.
Yes.
And that's when I left HuffPost to build Thrive Global. And coming full circle, the book that you mentioned is a book of micro steps. It's really, if you think of it, the practical manual to go with Thrive, the book, which is a more philosophical look at life.
Absolutely. And I think that people are going to find the micro steps and the things that you talk about in the new book very helpful to actually put some of this into action. And it is wonderful that we're now seeing more discussion around these topics. So hoping that leaders that are joining us today will start to click into how it is that they can help us drive this conversation and be more empathetic leaders, because you point out that that's something that's really critical.
And that is absolutely critical. And leaders need to model this new way of living and working, because we are talking about cultural transformation at the company level and at the societal level.
Yes.
So we need cultural permission. And we are finding with all the big companies we're working with, whether it's Accenture or Walmart or Salesforce, that when it starts from the top, it's much easier to transform the cultures and also bring it to the customers. That's like what is different. Right now, as you know, Pam, customers are looking at brands in a much more holistic way. What are the values they espouse? And that's becoming a very big part of the whole marketing apparatus, which is a great new move. And the question of empathy that you raised, these are really the soft skills that we had tended to be a little contemptuous towards, but now we realize they're absolutely essential.
Yes.
Everything we want to achieve, more inclusive and diverse cultures require empathy.
Yes.
Being able to navigate constant change requires more creativity and innovation. And these are all qualities that get most easily depleted when we are running on empty.
Yes. So I know we refer to these as soft skills, Arianna, but I'm going to ask for your help in changing that language, because I actually believe that these are the hard skills. These are the skills that many leaders find to be quite challenging. We've been trained to maybe lead in a certain manner that's more head-based, but we're now looking to leaders to lead more from their heart, which sometimes they find challenging. So we call them the soft skills, but I actually think that these are in some ways the more difficult skills. And I love that.
Join forces to change what we call them. I totally agree. In fact, one of the things that we started doing as we're looking at the hybrid reality of returning to work, some working from the office, some from home, that hybrid future that everybody's predicting.
Yes.
We want to focus not on the hybrid nature of where we work, but on the hybrid nature of how we work. We don't just need hybrid places, we need hybrid skills.
Yes.
And the skills that are wrongly called soft skills are actually incredibly important during this hybrid time.
Yes. So when you talk about leaders' ability to be more empathetic, we're really bringing the whole notion of humanity into the conversation of leadership and how we need to treat people as whole people who have whole lives. And one thing that you talk a lot about is about the importance of employee health, and that employee health is really one of the main drivers of company health. I found that to be a very interesting connection that you drew between the individuals in the company and the performance of the company. And since we know that every company now is going through a level of change and disruption and transformation, you talk a lot about this human element and addressing the human element. So I'd love for you to say a little bit more about how do we help people operate at their highest and best levels and bring this human element into how we think about the people in our organizations.
Well, Pam, you've spoken eloquently about that yourself from your own experience when you talk about the importance of energy management as opposed to time management, and when you define energy not just as physical, but mental, emotional, spiritual. This is all science-based, and I like to focus on that because the wellness conversation has sometimes been relegated to a warm and fuzzy conversation, kind of a nice to have benefit in the HR department. And we need to elevate it. Yes. We need to bring rigor to it, bring data to it, and make it essential for the health of the business, as you said. And one interesting new fact is that the SEC, for the first time, has required companies to report on how they are addressing their human capital in terms of attraction, development, and retention. That is unprecedented, and it shows really this moment, this zeitgeist moment, when the CHRO, your position, I wrote a piece for the Harvard Business Review about that, is now the most important executive other than the CEO. Yes. In the same way that during the financial crisis, the CFO was the most important executive. Now it's clearly the CHRO. And in the conversations we have with companies when we bring Thrive to their employees, it's often the whole C-suite that's engaged because they know that this is existential and incredibly important for the bottom line.
So first of all, I want to thank you for that lovely article in the Harvard Business Review. And I'm going to thank you on behalf of all the CHROs out there because it was a wonderful piece that did talk about the importance of the CHRO in the C-suite as we are moving through these challenging times that affect so many of our people in the workplace, and kind of the new focus that puts on human capital in the organizational conversations. And when you talk about the importance of human capital, when you talk about the importance of making sure that we're treating people with a sense of humanity, it really does call to mind for me the fact that people are people, we're not machines. And with all of the focus on technology today, I think sometimes we forget that people do need to renew and regenerate and rest. You talked about energy management, that if we want our people to succeed at their highest levels, we need to make sure that we're giving them that recovery time to hit peak performance, which, as you say, comes through in so much of the research that's done about how do you create high-performing people and high-performing teams. So it seems to be a critical element that we do need to put a little bit more focus on, because people are not machines. We do need to rest. We do need to recover. We do need to renew, which is so much about what you talk about in this concept of thriving.
Absolutely. In fact, what is interesting is that this delusion that we need to be always on to power through exhaustion dates back to the first industrial revolution, Pam, when we started revering machines. And the goal with machines, and subsequently the goal with software, is to minimize downtime. Software companies brag that this piece of software has 99.9999% uptime. Well, we need to realize that the human operating system is different, that downtime is a feature, not a bug of the human operating system.
Yes.
And we can look at elite athletes. Look at Tom Brady. He talked eloquently about how the way he lives his life, the way he prioritizes recovery, sleep, what he eats, etc., disconnecting from technology. He considered all that essential for winning the Super Bowl at 43.
Yes.
So we have so much data from science, from athletes, from business people who just need to put it all together and start putting it into practice in our own lives through these micro steps. I'm just passionate about micro steps because I'm sure a lot of the people listening to us now are extremely busy. And the last thing they want to hear from us is another kind of overhaul of everything they're doing.
Yes.
So we've broken it down to what we call micro steps, too small to fail. You have to break it down to tiny, tiny steps that lead to fundamental change one day at a time. And, during our conversation, would love to share some of my favorite micro steps so we can ground it to practical reality.
Yeah, I love that you make it practical, and you mentioned the fact that people are so busy, and you refer to this as the time famine. We're all struggling with a time famine. We simply don't have enough hours in the day to get everything done that we need to get done. And so, this notion of how do we focus on the things that are really going to make a difference, I think becomes critically important. And it's something that I know people in companies around the world are struggling with because there's so much stimulus coming in. There's so much multitasking going on in order for us to try to complete all of our personal and professional things in the course of a day. One of the things that you talk about is a possible solution for this time famine is to be more mindful, and that meditation is perhaps a key to this, to allowing our mind to focus, to clear and focus, to determine where are the places we should be spending our time. Can you talk a little bit more about this, explain that link, and how do you see some of those practices playing out in companies today?
So let me just start by saying that meditation itself may seem overwhelming. Don't tell me to take 20 minutes to meditate. I don't have that time. So I want us to break that down. The way we break it down at Thrive is to focus on the neuroscientific fact that it actually takes 60 to 90 seconds to course correct from stress, which is like a scientific fact I'm actually incredibly excited about, Pam, because you may not have 20 minutes, but you have a few 60-second breaks during the day that you can introduce into your life. I know I've done that, and it's game changing. And basically, it's based again on the scientific fact that stress is unavoidable. We can't sit here and promise anybody a stress-free existence, and unless they want to go to an island and chill under a mango tree. But if they want to achieve things, make stuff happen, stress is going to be part of it. But cumulative stress is avoidable.
Yes.
And it's cumulative stress that's the killer. It's cumulative stress that's been leading to the skyrocketing rates of hypertension, even diabetes, depression, anxiety, connected with all these outcomes we want to reverse. So one of my favorite micro steps is taking 60 seconds in the morning before we go to our phone, 60 seconds to take some deep breaths, to set our intention for the day, to remind ourselves we don't need to hurry and be in time famine all day, or to simply remember what we're grateful for. This 60 seconds is actually game changing because 72% of the world, Pam, starts the day by going straight to their phone.
Yeah,
And you don't know what's waiting for you there, right?
I have to say that during the pandemic, when I started working from home, I did start meditating, and it did seem like a big deal at first, but I just started with a minute and then 2 minutes and then 5 minutes. And the next thing you knew, I was at 20 to 30 minutes of, I'll just call it mindfulness, putting my brain at ease and trying to clear the clutter before I started the day. And I started small and I grew from there. And it did make a huge difference. And it is this practice of having rituals, because the ritual now is to get out of bed and grab the phone. 60 seconds doesn't seem like it should be a big deal, but for people that grab the phone first thing, it becomes a big deal. So my first step in the morning was to get out of bed and to go into a little bit of mindfulness meditation to center myself for the day. And it made a huge amount of difference.
Amazing. I would love you to write about that, and would love to publish it and social it, because the way we'll change the culture is by having leaders share what they're doing, their own practices.
Yes.
Because we need to break this idea that if you do these things, you're not really serious about your work, or you're not serious about achievement.
In fact, you're more serious if you do these things, right, Arianna?
Absolutely.
This whole notion that we can multitask, it's really such a myth that we've been led to believe. And all you have to do is think about the last time that you were on a video conference and reading your email at the same time. You think you're multitasking, but the next thing you know, you hear your name on the video conference and you realize that the conversation has gone someplace and now they're calling on you, but you've been reading your email. Your mind, and the science tells us your mind literally cannot be doing two things at the same time. So you then have to snap back into attention for the conference call and pull away from the email. So really, I would encourage people to get away from this notion of multitasking, because it simply doesn't allow us to do our best work, where we need to stay present and in the moment, doing one thing, hopefully high quality at a time. So it's a great practice to think about trying to move away from that multitasking.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's really why we make the distinction between multitasking, which involves your brain in 2 or 3 different activities, and habit stacking, which is what you can do when your brain is not engaged, like washing your hands, brushing your teeth, washing the dishes. This is a great time to add a healthy habit on top of an existing habit that doesn't require your brain.
Yes, absolutely.
Adding like a gratitude practice is amazing. We introduce, for example, families brushing their teeth together and all remembering what they are grateful for.
Yes, it's a wonderful practice.
Small little rituals like that don't take extra time, but introduce these moments of recharging and connection. And, Pam, I was reading a lot of the things you've been saying, and I loved when they asked you, like, what's your favorite mantra or affirmation? And you said, this too shall pass.
Yes.
This is incredibly important, especially during a time of anxiety and unprecedented uncertainty like we are in, and we are still in it. We're not out of it. Right. Although we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. But the idea that this too shall pass is so critical, and it counteracts anxiety, because anxiety and equanimity cannot coexist.
Absolutely. So Arianna, I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to go back to some of the remarks that Mary made during her opening about how all of this is affecting women in particular, and the fact that we have seen so many women have to leave their jobs. And we've coined this new phrase, she session, which has come out of the pandemic, unfortunately. So I wanted to ask you if you're concerned about this, and do you believe that we're looking at the possibility of really losing the progress that we've made toward parity and advancement for women? And if so, what do you think companies can do to help turn this around, this very negative trend that we see forming as it relates to women? What thoughts do you have for us?
So Pam, once again, we are seeing, in terms of what's happening to women and especially working mothers, that the problems that existed before the pandemic have now been exacerbated. So this is not a new problem. It's just become impossible to avoid. And companies need to realize that they need to do more than just the basic things of expanding family leave and allowing more flexibility. They can actually help women navigate their mental load, which is the main problem of having to do their work, run their families and run their homes and teach their children all at the same time. So we actually launched a program in partnership with Eve Rodsky, who wrote a book called Fair Play, called Working Families, which I kind of love because it brings the organizational system that works in offices into the home. Basically, Pam, all the data shows that if women continue to wing it at home, they're going to be the ones carrying the major burden of these multiple identities. So instead, we've created this system based on an ownership model, the way we do it at the office. So instead of partners saying, "How can I help you, dear?" we want them to say, "What can I own?" Because the problem is not just help, the problem is ownership. So we have this model, which is own, execute, complete. If you own lunch, you own lunch from beginning to the end. If you own the birthday party, you own the birthday party. We actually have digital cards that the couple can share. At the end of each week, we have a one-on-one where we discuss what worked, what didn't, where we can shuffle cards. And a whole communication system so that we don't always express out of resentment and anger, but we communicate the way we try to communicate at work in ways that's more effective. So I'm excited about that because at first it seems, oh, wow, we're going to introduce a cumbersome system to our home life. But in fact, it makes it much easier to allow the loving of the relationship to flourish because you are not caught up in all these petty grievances of who took out the garbage and why am I doing this for the third night running, etc.
I often feel when I'm talking to team members that are having conflict in the workplace that I'm actually doing some sort of marriage counseling or family counseling. And it sounds like your work is actually going now into the home, which is not that unusual given that we're seeing this sort of breakdown of the barriers between work and home life. So many of the principles that will work in one place should also be able to work in another. I heard both you and Eve talk about this work at the No. 7 Beauty Company event a few weeks ago, and it sounds like some remarkable work, very interesting, and I think it's really going to make a positive impact for women who are trying to navigate their way through these very challenging times. It's wonderful when you think about the fact that despite the fact that we've gone through this pandemic, there are some learnings that come out of it, right? And so if you think about it, I think Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. We want to make sure that we do come out of this with some learnings that we can continue to advance, some of our interests in terms of how we work through transformation, how we think about the future of work, how we move to this new normal that you've started talking about. What are some of the things, Arianna, that you really hope that we are learning as we move forward? What are some things that you really hope we're taking away coming out of this global pandemic in terms of how we think about the future of work differently and move into this new normal?
Well, first of all, it's really important to underline the fact that while this has been an incredible year of losses, we cannot underestimate that, losses of loved ones, financial losses. It's also an incredible catalyst for fundamental change that had to happen anyway. But as you know, Pam, change is incredibly hard. And even pre-pandemic, we had these skyrocketing increases in chronic diseases like diabetes, like hypertension, and we had a mental health crisis. Now we know we can no longer continue like that. Yeah. And we have seen that when we break it down into these small daily changes and begin to see the impact that we have on our work and our lives when we are recharged, we change the cultural assumption about when we are most effective. It's not easy, because if you think of it, it's been decades of glamorizing a frenetic way of living, decades of phrases like "I'll sleep when I'm dead" or "you snooze, you lose," which are really in our DNA. And so we need to change all that, both by looking at the science and also by powerful storytelling, like you sharing your story, other leaders sharing their stories, people in the front lines sharing their stories, and learning from each other, and also bringing together ancient wisdom. I'm passionate about the fact that all that modern science is doing is really validating ancient wisdom. Whether you look at the Stoics or the Tao in China or Zen in Japan, every spiritual tradition has been telling us the same thing, that we all have this place of peace, wisdom, strength in us, and we need to give ourselves these moments during the day to reconnect with it, to connect with the eye of the hurricane, if you want.
Yes. So I was so pleased, Arianna, when you came out with the book specifically focused on sleep, because I have always been an advocate for the need for sleep. And I know that there's some small percentage of people in the world who only need a few hours, but the research, and again, the science tells us that the average person needs 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep in order to be effective. And you dedicated an entire book to how to maximize your ability to go to sleep, stay asleep, and get the benefits of sleep. And I've read somewhere that when people don't get enough sleep, they're actually functionally intoxicated. It's as if you're going out into the world having consumed too much alcohol in terms of how your brain responds to the lack of sleep. I found that to be a fascinating neuroscience fact. When you mentioned earlier about my interest in energy management, we talk a lot about the physical energy, which comes from things like sleep and nutrition and exercise. We also talk a fair amount about mental energy, which is all about focus. What I love in your work is you also talk about the other two dimensions, which are the spiritual piece, which is all about purpose and making sure that we're doing work and leading lives that have purpose, because this also energizes us and raises our energy. And then the fourth piece is about emotional energy and gratitude that you spoke about earlier. So what can you say, share with us in terms of some of your thoughts about the spiritual and the emotional energy, which frankly don't get as much conversation in the workplace?
Absolutely. I'd love to just say one quick thing about sleep, because thank you so much for bringing it up. It's foundational, not just for our immunity. We now have a lot of data that just came out last week about how sleep deprivation affects your immunity in this COVID crisis. So we know that it affects us in every way physically, but it also affects us mentally and emotionally. There's been a lot of studies, for example, about the connection between sleep deprivation and postpartum depression, or the connection between sleep deprivation and lack of focus.
Yes.
And so it's connected in everything. Sleep is as important for the body as it is for the brain.
Yes.
It's the only time that we can clean the toxins from our brain. So that's why what we're doing at Thrive is connecting all these things. Sleep is not just a point solution. It's an integrated solution to our emotional and spiritual being as well. It's also the time of dreams. I don't know if anybody here remembers your dreams, but I have made a habit of writing down my dreams and connecting with something from another dimension in life, whatever your spiritual beliefs are. I think most of us can agree that this material reality is not everything. So anytime we can open up ourselves to a more transcendent dimension, it puts everything here in perspective rather than shrinking our lives just to our own to-do list and our own daily problems.
Right.
And again, being practical again, Pam, I'm obsessed with breaking it down to practical steps for people. I would highly recommend a nightly ritual. And start small. Again, mine is 30 minutes now, but begin with 5. The first step of this ritual is to declare an end to your working day. You have to declare it. It doesn't exist. You could, I'm sure everybody listening could stay up all night answering emails, texting. There's no end. So declaring an end, and you declare the end by turning off your phone and charging it outside your bedroom. And anybody who has children knows that you do that for your children. You read them Good Night Moon, you give them a bath, you sing them a lullaby. There's a whole transition to help them disconnect from their world. I recorded a parody of Good Night Moon called Good Night Smartphone for Audible. And then how do you transition from the day? I have a hot bath or hot shower, not for cleanliness, but to wash away the day. It's almost like a purification ritual. The day is done, with all the good and the bad. And then I love to read real books in bed.
It becomes even more challenging, doesn't it, Arianna, when people are working from home, and that ability to delineate their workday from their personal time becomes that much more challenging. And I know when I was working primarily at home, I did establish certain patterns of behavior that would let me know that it was time for me to shut down work and move into my personal life. And in some ways, it was about where I was in the house. I had a dedicated office, and when I would leave that office, I would move into my den or my kitchen. And that was the time that said to me, okay, now I'm transitioning into my personal time, even though I'm in the very same house. Right. But you do have to be deliberate about it if you want to, as you say, have a definitive end to the day, and not let the fact that you're at home or that you have the technology to stay connected 24/7 to force you down that path unintentionally. I love the fact that you also talk in your work about the importance of gratitude. And so tying some of these thoughts together, I recently did a 21-day meditation that was all about abundance and gratitude. And I led it for a number of my friends, which also gave me an opportunity to give, which is one of your principles in thriving, the whole notion of giving. And while it certainly took time to prepare for the sessions every night, to get out the readings and the homework and the assignments and help people through the 21 meditation process, it wasn't just helpful for me to think with gratitude about all of the abundance that I have in my life, but it also helped me help others, which made it that much more amazing to participate in. So we are all busy. We all do have a number of commitments that we have to address, but I totally agree with you that just stepping out of your own world and giving to others and sharing with others and going through something like an abundance meditation practice with others can be so enriching and really help us all as we go down this path toward thriving that you're promoting.
I love this, and I love the fact that you are demonstrating that taking care of yourself as a leader is not self-indulgent. It's not a luxury. It's the best thing you can do both for yourself and your teams. And I worked with Ellen Shook on that. She's the CHRO at Accenture.
Yes.
And at the beginning, she wrote about it, so I'm not divulging any secrets, but at the beginning of the pandemic, she and I were talking, and she was telling me how stressed she was, how she couldn't sleep. She had stopped doing her daily walk. And so we talked about her changing her mindset. So she didn't see these things as luxury she could not afford because she had to care for her teams around the world. And she started doing her walk again. I remember at the beginning of January getting a text from her saying, 300th day with no stop. And the impact it had on her ability to lead, but also her ability to empathize for others. So last week I had a call from her saying, I really feel my teams are burnt out. We need to do something for them. So tomorrow we are starting a leadership journey to support the 90 people on her HR team around the world. I really feel that when you do these things for yourself, it makes you much more alert to the signals of what's happening around your own company.
Absolutely. So we're coming down on the end of our time, Arianna, for this conversation. I knew the time was just going to fly by, but I want to make sure that we have time to take some questions from others. So before we go there, I wanted to ask you one last question. And it's evident that you're so passionate about this work and just relentless in getting the word out through your books, through your speaking engagements, through the time that you spend in conversations like this to get the word out, to share this wonderful content that you pull together. And you really have almost a lifetime commitment to helping people with their well-being and fulfilling their well-being and how they work and how they live. So I want to ask you, what drives you to continue to do the work that you do? Because I know it's very time-consuming, certainly very energizing, but what keeps you going, Arianna, on this journey?
So, Pam, I feel incredibly blessed that my job is my love, my mission, and that it's so fulfilling to be doing something that I believe can have an impact on people's lives. And all my life, I wanted to help move hearts and minds. And I wrote a book in my 20s that included a quote from Solzhenitsyn on the title page that said, if you wanted to change the world, who would you begin with, yourself or others? And the recognition that we need to begin with ourselves, because how we show up affects everything else. And we now have an opportunity to actually bring together all these things that I've spent my whole life studying or practicing in terms of ancient wisdom and science and media and technology, and have a real being impact in our culture. And like any cultural change, Pam, as you know, you just need a critical mass of people.
Yes.
You never need everybody, just a critical mass beginning to think and live in a different way, and then everybody else follows.
Absolutely. And you're just the embodiment of the value of purpose, that you have this purpose, this calling that doesn't even make it feel like work, I'm sure, for you sometimes, to get out here and have these conversations and share all of your wisdom. So we do have a couple of questions from the audience, so I'd like to go there. The first one is, I would be interested in hearing Arianna's thoughts on how we as leaders can change this culture of over productivity and increasingly high expectations for our human employees.
I love that. I think it involves really recognizing that all the emphasis we've had on optimization, optimizing every minute, optimizing technology, optimizing workflow systems, etc. All that is important, but never enough. All the data shows that you can give people the most impeccable tech resources. If they're stressed out of their minds, it doesn't matter. There's some great research that just came out of your alma mater, Yale, specifically about the impact that stress has on our brain. It literally shuts down our thinking functions.
Yeah.
And so that's why we expect productivity to decline if people don't learn to manage stress.
Yes.
That's the productivity paradox.
Yeah, it is a huge mindset shift, because we have been raised to believe you work harder, you work faster, and you get more done, when the reality is at some point you hit that point of diminishing returns and you're not increasing productivity. So how we can bring this balance back into our workday with the renewal and the recharging that we talked about earlier, that's the essential piece, because that's the piece that actually is going to start driving greater productivity.
Yes, and also, Pam, I don't use the word balance. I'll tell you why. Because the truth is that there is no balance. Like, there will be a time in your work life or mine when we have to go the extra mile.
Yes.
when we work over the weekend, we work late into the night. That doesn't matter if we then immediately take the time to recharge.
Yes. Right. That's the key piece.
That's the key piece. I mean, we call it thrive time. And when we hire people, we tell them, listen, this is not a 9-to-5 existence. There is no job that matters that can be a 9-to-5 job. You have to be prepared to go the extra mile. You have to care enough to go the extra mile. But then don't just ignore all the science and power through exhaustion. That's when people get sick. That's when they make mistakes. We give them thrive time to recharge and then come back recharged.
Yes, I love that, thrive time. I'm going to move on to another question, Arianna, from the audience. How important do you think mentorship is, and how have you learned from mentors in your career?
I feel mentorship is critical. And I've learned a lot from mentors and continue to learn from mentors. And, my first mentor was my mother, who taught me something critical that I feel, especially women, we really need to remind ourselves that failure is okay. My mother used to say, failure is not the opposite of success, it's a stepping stone to success. And that made me be willing to take risks, to fail along the way, and not to see that as somehow devastating. But just,
Sorry,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, have you yet written a book with all of your mother's wonderful sayings? Because I've heard you quote her many times, and she has some brilliant ones, and I'm just wondering if you put that book together yet. If not, I think that's the next one you
That's
should
the
work
next
on.
book. I wrote a book for my daughters called On Becoming Fearless, which was a little bit about all really that she taught me about fearlessness. And again, she used to say that fearlessness is not the absence of fear. It's really the willingness to do something even when you are afraid.
Yes. It's wonderful. I've heard you quote your mother so many times. I'm looking forward to that book. We have another question from the audience. Why did it take a global pandemic for us to get to the point where we allow the human element into our work?
What a great question. Anybody who is a student of history knows how hard it is to move from knowing what to do to doing it. I mean, look at all the conferences we've been to about sustainability, about inclusive capitalism, about closing the inequality gap. I mean, conferences for years and decades, and we're still a long way from doing these things. So, as you said earlier, quoting Winston Churchill, sometimes it does take a big crisis to have this catalyst needed for fundamental change. And so if we can see the pandemic as a portal that we go through, leaving behind what is not working and not rebuilding the world the same way, but imagining a new world.
Yes, it's such an opportunity, and it feels like we were on an evolutionary path to get here, but this pandemic may have just been the catalyst to turn this into a more of a revolutionary kind of work, because we're hearing about it so much now, Arianna, and it is so important. And when I think about what I'm hoping we come out of this pandemic learning, it is that people are at the center of everything that we do as companies and delivering all of the value that all the companies deliver to customers, patients, their consumers. But if we lose sight of the importance of the people and the people's health, the people's mental health and well-being, then we're setting us up for more negative outcomes from this pandemic. So it feels like the time is now. You wrote about it 6-7 years ago, but I do feel like the time really is now to
Absolutely,
see
and
much
that's
more
why
progress.
I'm very grateful that leaders like you are in these key positions to make a difference. And what we are seeing, Pam, is that the work you are doing, say, with your employees, with your teams, can then spread to your customers. That is a very interesting connection now.
Yes.
That we are seeing how the work that CHROs are doing is spreading beyond their own companies. And I absolutely love that.
Yes. All right, Arianna, another question from the audience. Women have learned the importance of representation with female executives. Do you recommend a strong male advocate for true partnership?
Absolutely. As Boss and John said, when I was on the board of Uber and she was doing marketing there, and she used to tell us all, it's not just for Black people to bring about racial equality, it's for all of us. In the same way, it's not just for women to bring about gender equality. I mean, all these big goals that we have in society should be everybody's priority. And I think having allies and mentors and sponsors and men who prioritize gender equity and racial equity and diversity and all these things is absolutely key. It's not going to happen otherwise.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I'll say one of the things that I've learned as I've advanced in my career, I started off one of the people outside the boardroom where all these big decisions were getting made about people's advancement and career opportunities and growth opportunities in the company. And when you're more junior, you wonder what's happening in the conference room where these things are being discussed. It's almost like a black hole. And as I've now moved into that room, I do truly see the importance of having those sponsors, those advocates, those people that are in the room that can help tell your story when you're not there. And so for me, that is a place where the importance of allies, sponsors, mentors really becomes important, because we're not always there to represent our story. So having other people that can do that for us, whether they're men or women, it doesn't matter. You just want to have people that advocate for you when you're not in the room. And I knew it, but you really begin to know it when you are on the other side in the room, understanding how some of these conversations unfold. So it was a great question and a super important thing for people to remember as they build their sponsorship and their allies. So we are really literally now counting down to the last few minutes. And so I wanted to take a moment, Arianna, to thank you so much for sharing this time with me and sharing your time with this audience. There are so many pearls of wisdom in your writing and in what you share. And again, the time just feels like it couldn't be better to continue having these conversations with which what I understand is over 600 leaders here today that are participating in this conversation. So thank you so much for your time. I knew that it was going to be a highlight of my week and you didn't disappoint. So I really want to thank you. Thank you for your time today.
I wanted to thank you. I just loved our conversation. I loved how authentic you are about your own journey. And I think your leadership is so critical. I would love to continue the conversation by giving people the PDFs to my books, Thrive and Sleep Revolution, if they want to find out more about the science and the wisdom behind everything we discussed. I write about all these things on my LinkedIn every day. So anything we can do to support each other, inspire and motivate and learn from each other is so important right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll just close this out. Thank you for the shout out to Eve Brodsky. She also spoke in our Women's Leadership Series in October, and we hosted a book club with her. So many in the audience have read the book Fair Play. If you haven't, and if you missed that conversation, go to our YouTube channel. It's all there. So many pearls of wisdom, as you said, Pam. If I were to recap them all, we'd be here for another hour, but I'll just highlight 3 quick takeaways for me. Reframing this concept of soft skills, right? Things like empathy and well-being, these are the hard skills that are needed among leaders to lead a thriving organization. So I love that idea of reframing this concept. 2, stress is an unavoidable part of life, right? We're not looking to eliminate stress, but that cumulative stress is the real problem, and it can be mitigated by working to manage our energy. And then third for me was that self-care is not a luxury that we can't afford, but it's an essential that we can't afford not to do. And the data are here and more are coming. And Arianna, we can share some of that in our post-event email. So we'll work with you and your team to be sure that we can get some of this information out to everyone who was on today. And then I loved, you gave us very practical things, right? How do we do this? Break it into micro steps. It's a lot easier than thinking of, tackling something so big, and create a ritual at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. That's something we can all do. And then so critically, the modeling from the top. So people like Pam, in her organization, sharing these stories and modeling this behavior, how critical it is. So thank you both for being here. Thank you to our members and the guests who have tuned in. If you want to check out all of our other amazing programs that are coming up, they're all on our website. You can see them all there. And what a great way to start our Monday. So thanks, everyone. Be well, and I hope you all thrive this week.